In the heart of a sleepy village where cobbled streets wound like lazy streams and the chimneys puffed soft curls of smoke, there lived a clockmaker named Tobias and his daughter Mia. Their home sat at the end of the main street, a crooked little house with windows shaped like hourglasses and a shop filled with clocks of every kind. Grandfather clocks that boomed the hours, tiny pocket watches that ticked like whispers, and everything in between. Mia had grown up to the constant rhythm of ticking and tocking, the music of her father's world. Tobias was known far and wide as a master craftsman, but the villagers often whispered about him behind his back. A man too clever for his own good, they'd say, wagging their heads. Mia ignored the gossip. She loved her father, quirks and all. But even she had to admit there was something peculiar about his clocks. They never broke, never stopped, and always seemed a little too alive. One crisp autumn evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Tobias hurried out to deliver a special order to a merchant in the next town. "Don't touch the shop while I'm gone," he warned, as he always did, before closing the door behind him. Mia nodded dutifully, watching his cart disappear down the road. Left alone, she wandered through the house. It was an odd little place, full of strange contraptions and half-finished projects. She wasn't supposed to pry, but her curiosity often got the better of her. That evening, something felt different. As she roamed the quiet halls, her ears caught a soft, unfamiliar sound, a rhythmic hum, low and steady, coming from somewhere nearby. Mia followed the sound, her bare feet brushing over the worn wooden floorboards. It seemed to come from the far end of the hallway, where a tall cabinet sat against the wall. She'd seen the cabinet 1,000 times, its polished surface glinting faintly in the dim light, but tonight, it seemed different. She stepped closer, heart quickening, and ran her fingers along its edge. Then she felt it, a draught, cool and faint, wafting from a seam that shouldn't be there. Mia frowned. She pressed her hand against the wood, and with a quiet creak, the cabinet shifted ever so slightly, revealing a sliver of space. She pushed harder. The cabinet swung open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into the shadows. A hidden door. The hum was louder now, vibrating faintly through the air. Mia hesitated, glancing back over her shoulder. Tobias would be furious if he found out she'd meddled, but her curiosity tugged at her harder than any warning. Taking a deep breath, she stepped through the opening and descended the staircase, the wood groaning softly under her weight. At the bottom, she found herself in a room unlike any she'd ever seen. It was vast and circular, with walls lined by clocks of every size and shape, each ticking in perfect harmony. Golden gears turned smoothly behind glass cases, glowing faintly as if lit from within. On a central table sat an enormous clock face, its hands spinning slowly backward, while tiny orbs of light floated around it like fireflies. The hum she'd followed now filled the air, steady and calming, like the heartbeat of the room itself. Mia's breath caught. She reached out to touch one of the clocks, its surface warm and smooth under her fingertips. It was as if the clocks were alive, their mechanisms pulsing with something more than simple machinery. Her mind raced. This was why her father's clocks were so perfect, so magical. This was his secret. Suddenly the hum faltered. A clock on the far wall stuttered, its hands jerking unnaturally before settling back into their rhythm. Mia froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She had the distinct feeling she wasn't supposed to be here. Footsteps echoed above her, sharp and deliberate. Tobias was home. Chapter 2, The Master Clock. Mia barely had time to retreat to the shadows of the workshop before her father's voice boomed from above. "Mia, where are you?" Tobias called, his footsteps creaking across the floorboards above. She pressed herself against the cool stone wall, heart racing, trying to decide whether to reveal herself or sneak back upstairs. Before she could move, the hidden cabinet groaned open and light spilled down the staircase. Tobias stood at the top, his tall figure casting a long shadow down the steps. "So," he said, his tone heavy, "you found it." Mia's stomach churned with guilt as she stepped forward, her hands twisting nervously. "I heard a sound," she began, but her father raised a hand to stop her. "It was bound to happen sooner or later," Tobias muttered, descending the stairs with slow, deliberate steps. His expression wasn't angry, but it was grave, the kind of look that made Mia squirm. He reached the bottom and surveyed the room, the glow of the clocks reflecting in his sharp, thoughtful eyes. "This," he said, gesturing to the room, "is my true workshop, the place where time itself is measured and maintained." Mia blinked, her guilt momentarily overshadowed by confusion. "Time? Maintained?" she asked, glancing around at the clocks. Tobias sighed and stepped toward the central table, where the large clock face lay surrounded by floating orbs. He motioned for Mia to follow, and she did, her curiosity outweighing her unease. "This," he said, resting a hand gently on the clock face, "is the master clock. It is older than you can imagine and far more powerful than anything I've ever crafted. It governs the flow of time for our world, every second, every minute, every hour. It is the heartbeat of existence." Mia stared at the intricate design, the delicate hands moving backward in perfect rhythm. The faint hum filled the room, as steady as a heartbeat. "But why is it here? Why do you have it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tobias chuckled softly, though there was no humour in it. "It wasn't meant to be here, not in a place like this. It was entrusted to me by my master, who was entrusted by his before him. For generations, this responsibility has been passed down, always to those who understand the fragility of time." Mia's gaze darted around the room, taking in the golden gears and glowing faces. She couldn't imagine what it would be like to hold so much responsibility. "But why hide it? Why not tell anyone?" "Because," Tobias said, his voice firm, "there are those who would seek to control it, to bend time to their will. If the master clock is tampered with, the balance will break and time itself could unravel." Mia swallowed hard, her chest tightening at the thought. "Unravel?" she asked hesitantly. Tobias nodded. "Imagine days slipping into nights without warning, seasons blending together, years lost in a blink while others drag on forever. Chaos, Mia. That's what would happen if this clock fell into the wrong hands." Mia's gaze returned to the master clock, its golden hands spinning so gracefully, so hypnotically. She couldn't help but feel a pull toward it, a quiet whisper in the back of her mind, begging her to understand its secrets. Her father's voice broke through her thoughts. "Mia," he said, his tone softer now, "I need you to promise me something." She looked up at him, meeting his eyes. "Anything," she said earnestly. "Promise me you'll never touch it, never interfere with it. The balance is delicate, far too delicate to risk curiosity. Swear to me." Mia hesitated for the briefest moment before nodding. "I promise," she said, though the words felt heavy in her mouth. Tobias seemed satisfied, though the weight of his expression didn't lift. "Good," he said, "now come. You've seen enough for tonight." Reluctantly, Mia followed him back up the stairs, her head buzzing with everything she'd learned. As Tobias locked the hidden door behind them, she thought about the master clock, the gentle hum of its gears still lingering in her ears. She had promised her father, but promises, she realised, were harder to keep when curiosity burned so brightly. Chapter 3: A Silent Betrayal. The morning started like any other. The village bustled with its usual rhythm. Shopkeepers opened their shutters, horses clopped lazily along the cobblestones, and the church bell rang its familiar 8 chimes. Mia sat at the counter of the clock shop, tinkering with a small brass timepiece her father had entrusted her to repair. The air shifted subtly when the door creaked open, letting in Julian. He was her father's apprentice, or had been until yesterday. Tobias had dismissed him after months of growing tension. Julian, with his sharp green eyes and ever-present smirk, was clever, no doubt about that. But his temper and impatience had made him reckless, and Tobias wouldn't tolerate it any longer. "Morning, Mia," Julian drawled, his voice unnervingly casual. He strolled into the shop, his movements loose, almost serpentine. He didn't belong here anymore, and they both knew it. "What are you doing here?" Mia asked, putting down her tools and standing up. She glanced toward the workshop door, but her father had gone to the market. They were alone. Julian shrugged. "Thought I'd stop by, collect a few things, souvenirs." Mia crossed her arms. "You're not supposed to be here. If my father—" "Your father," Julian interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp, "made a mistake." His smirk twisted into something darker. "He doesn't see what I'm capable of, but he'll regret that soon enough." Before Mia could respond, Julian's eyes flicked toward the hallway that led to the hidden cabinet. A chill crept over her. How could he know about that? Her father had been so careful. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, stepping forward to block his path. But Julian only smiled, pulling a key from his pocket, a long, ornate thing that gleamed in the morning light. Mia's stomach dropped. The master clock's key. Her father must have left it in the workshop, trusting it was safe. Julian must have stolen it. "Give that back!" she snapped, reaching for the key. But Julian was quicker. He darted past her, moving towards the hidden door. Mia's heart pounded as she followed, yelling after him, but he ignored her. By the time she reached the cabinet, it was already ajar. The hidden staircase yawned open, its steps leading down into the glow of the secret workshop. Julian disappeared into the shadows and Mia raced after him, her pulse thundering in her ears. When she reached the bottom, she found him standing before the master clock, the key poised in his hand. "Don't!" she cried, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "You don't know what you're doing." Julian turned, his expression alight with arrogance. "Of course I know what I'm doing. This clock is power, Mia. Your father's been hiding it, hoarding it. But why shouldn't I take it? I could control time itself." "It's not meant to be controlled," Mia shouted. "You'll destroy everything." But Julian didn't listen. He inserted the key into the master clock, twisting it with a triumphant grin. The clock shuddered, its hum growing louder, deeper. The glowing gears stuttered, then spun wildly. Mia felt the air ripple, the energy in the room twisting unnaturally. Then silence. A profound, unnatural stillness fell over the workshop. The hum was gone, replaced by an emptiness that made Mia's skin crawl. She stumbled back, her breath catching as a terrible realization struck her. Time had stopped. She scrambled up the stairs and burst into the shop. The village was frozen. A horse hung mid-step, its hooves suspended in the air. A baker stood motionless at his stall, flour spilling endlessly from his hands. Even the leaves on the trees were stuck, caught in an invisible web. "Mia," Julian's voice called from behind her, mocking. "It's beautiful, isn't it? A world I can shape however I want." She turned to face him, fury surging through her. "You've ruined everything," she shouted, her voice breaking with the weight of her fear. "This isn't power, it's chaos." Julian smirked. "Chaos is only the first step. I'll learn to control it, to master it." Before she could respond, he vanished, slipping into the stillness like a shadow. Mia was alone in a world frozen in time. Her chest heaved as she tried to think, to process what had happened. She reached for the necklace she always wore, a small copper charm her father had given her years ago. It hummed faintly under her touch, its warmth comforting. That's why she hadn't been frozen, she realized. The charm had protected her. But her father wasn't wearing one. He was frozen like everyone else. Mia's gaze turned back toward the hidden staircase. The master clock was broken and it was up to her to fix it. Her father had warned her never to interfere, but what choice did she have now? Taking a deep breath, she stepped back into the workshop. Time might have stopped, but her fight to restore it had only just begun. Chapter 4. The World Stands Still. The silence was suffocating, not the peaceful kind that comes with a quiet night or a sleepy morning, but the kind that buzzed in your ears, heavy and unnatural. Mia stood at the edge of the village square, her heart hammering in her chest, though nothing around her stirred. A bird hung mid-flight above the bakery, its wings frozen in an eternal flap. The baker stood still behind his stall, flour clinging to his fingers like dust to an untouched statue. A child chasing a rolling hoop on the cobblestones hovered mid-step, her laughter silenced before it could escape. Mia's fingers brushed the copper charm at her neck, its faint warmth grounding her. It was her anchor in this strange, still world, a reminder that she alone had been spared. She didn't know why her father had given it to her, only that it must have been important. Now it was the only thing keeping her moving. She turned toward the clock shop. It looked no different, its crooked roof and hourglass windows just as they always were. But inside, her father stood frozen at his workbench, a magnifying glass raised to inspect the delicate innards of a pocket watch. His face, usually so full of life, was empty now, his eyes wide but unseeing. Mia hesitated at the doorway, her stomach knotting. "Papa," she whispered, though she knew he wouldn't respond. She stepped closer, her trembling fingers brushing his arm. It was solid and warm like any living person's, but he didn't move, didn't blink. Tears welled in her eyes, but she swallowed them down. This wasn't the time for crying. "I'll fix this," she said softly, as if he could hear her. "I promise." She left the shop and wandered through the village, the stillness pressing down on her with every step. The world looked so familiar yet felt utterly alien. The river at the edge of town, usually babbling cheerfully, was now a frozen sheet of glass, its surface undisturbed by ripples or reflections. The trees lining the path hung heavy with leaves caught in mid-fall, their colours glowing faintly in the dim light of the halted sun. Even the air felt different. It was heavy and dense, as though the world held its breath, waiting for something to change. Mia's mind raced as she returned to the hidden workshop beneath the shop. The master clock sat at the centre of the room, its gears unmoving, its golden hands stuck. Without its hum, the space felt hollow, its magic snuffed out like a candle in the wind. She stepped closer, her fingers hovering over the clock's intricate face. It looked fragile now, like a glass sculpture that might shatter if touched too roughly. She could see where the damage had been done, gears misaligned, a crack running through the delicate filigree. Julian's tampering had thrown the mechanism into chaos, and now time itself had paid the price. Her father's warnings echoed in her mind. "The balance is too delicate to meddle with. Swear to me you'll never interfere." But he wasn't here. No one was. If she didn't do something, the world would stay like this forever, a silent, frozen portrait of life. Mia's hand curled into a fist. She couldn't let fear stop her. Her father had always told her she was clever, that her hands were steady enough for even the most intricate repairs, and she wasn't alone. The charm around her neck pulsed faintly, as if encouraging her. She studied the master clock carefully, tracing its patterns with her eyes. The gears were like a puzzle, their shapes interlocking in ways that seemed both mechanical and magical. Her father's tools sat nearby, and she grabbed a pair of fine pliers, her fingers steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in her head. "I can do this," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The first gear shifted under her touch, a faint click breaking the silence. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was something. She felt a spark of hope flicker in her chest. But as she worked, another thought crept into her mind. Julian was still out there, somewhere in the frozen world. And if he had been reckless enough to break the master clock, what might he do now? What if he wasn't finished? Mia set her jaw, determination hardening her resolve. She would fix the clock no matter what it took. But she would also need to find Julian and stop him before he caused more harm. She looked up at the frozen world one last time, her father's unmoving face etched in her memory. Then she turned back to the master clock, the weight of the world resting on her shoulders. Time had stopped, but Mia's journey was just beginning. Chapter 5, The Puzzle of the Gears. Mia knelt before the master clock, its once majestic frame now marred by Julian's careless tampering. The gears that should have turned smoothly were scattered across the workbench and the floor, their intricate teeth gleaming faintly in the dim light. It looked less like a masterpiece and more like the wreckage of a fragile dream. She picked up a golden cog, its surface warm and unnervingly alive beneath her fingertips. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "The master clock is more than metal and gears, it holds a piece of the world's soul." Mia placed the gear back carefully, her hands trembling. The damage wasn't just physical, it was woven into the essence of time itself. The enormity of the task before her pressed heavily on her chest. She couldn't just tinker her way through this like she did with the shop's simpler timepieces. The master clock was something else entirely. She stood, brushing her hands on her skirt, and began scouring the room. If her father had hidden secrets about the clock's design, they'd be here. Tobias had always been methodical, leaving hints where others might overlook them. On the back of the workbench, her eyes caught something unusual, a faded inscription etched into the wood. She bent closer, running her fingers over the uneven letters. "Time is written where hands cannot reach." "What does that mean?" Mia muttered. She stepped back, studying the workbench for clues. Her father loved riddles, often using them to test her problem-solving skills. But this one seemed different, heavier, almost as if it had been left for a moment like this. The words repeated in her head as her gaze swept the room, where hands cannot reach. She frowned, looking upward. Above the workshop, the walls stretched into shadow, and at the very top hung a row of shelves she had never seen used. They were too high to reach without a ladder, their contents hidden in the gloom. Her pulse quickened. That had to be it. Dragging over a wobbly stool, she climbed carefully, straining to see. Her fingers brushed the dusty surface of a shelf, and her heart leapt when they touched something solid. She grasped it and pulled down a small wooden box, its surface engraved with the same swirling patterns as the master clock. Setting it on the workbench, she unlatched it carefully. Inside was a rolled piece of parchment, fragile with age. As she unrolled it, her breath caught. It was a blueprint, sketched in her father's meticulous hand. But this wasn't just a map of the clock's mechanism. It was annotated with strange symbols and diagrams, unlike anything she'd seen before. At the bottom, her father's familiar scrawl read, "The pieces are bound to time's heart. Begin where the first second falls." The riddle made her head spin. What was the heart of time? And what did he mean by the first second? She scanned the blueprint, her eyes catching on a faint line that wasn't part of the design, a hidden path that spiraled outward from the center of the clock, marked by tiny symbols. Mia leaned closer, her mind racing. The symbols were constellations, she realized, stars charted across a sky she knew well from evenings spent with her father under the village's clear night. The line led to a single star at the top of the map, Polaris, the North Star. Her stomach flipped as realization struck. Her father had always called Polaris the first second, the guiding star that marked the way when all else was dark. If the blueprint pointed to it, there had to be more hidden in the house. She turned to the workshop's northern wall, where an old grandfather clock stood. It was one of her father's earliest creations, its face adorned with constellations instead of numbers. The pendulum hung motionless now, caught in the frozen silence of the world. But the clock had always been special to her father. She examined it carefully, running her fingers along the carvings on its surface. At the base, she noticed a small panel, almost invisible against the wood grain. Gently, she pressed it, and it popped open with a soft click. Inside was a second blueprint, smaller than the first, but no less intricate. This one detailed a specific section of the master clock's inner mechanism, with a note scribbled beside it. "Without this, the gears cannot turn. The answer lies where silence grows loudest." Mia's grip tightened on the blueprint as determination surged through her. Each clue brought her closer to understanding the master clock's mysteries. Her father had left her a path to follow, one he must have hoped she'd never need. But the world had gone still, and there was no turning back now. She tucked the second blueprint into her pocket and turned back to the broken clock. The scattered gears seemed to watch her, waiting. Where silence grows loudest. The next piece was out there, hidden in the stillness, and Mia was ready to find it. Chapter 6: The Realm of Lost Seconds. The air in the workshop shimmered faintly as Mia held the blueprint up to the light, her heart pounding in the heavy silence. Her father's note, "The answer lies where silence grows loudest," echoed in her mind. She had spent hours examining every corner of the workshop, every tickless clock, every shadowed nook. It wasn't until her fingers brushed the master clock itself that the realization struck her. The silence was the answer. The master clock wasn't just broken, it was still. Its hum, once the heartbeat of time, was gone, leaving the world locked in a frozen rhythm. And if silence was the clue, then the clock itself must be the doorway. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the cracked face of the master clock. The golden gears inside glinted faintly, their stillness almost menacing. Taking a deep breath, she turned the small latch she'd found on the side. The clock shuddered, and a low, resonant tone echoed through the room. The air rippled. Light burst from the clock, golden and warm, spiraling outward like threads of spun glass. Mia shielded her eyes as the room dissolved around her, the floor vanishing beneath her feet. She fell, not down but through, into a place that defied sense. When she landed, the ground beneath her was soft and shimmering, as though made of woven starlight. The air here hummed faintly, vibrating with energy. Around her, millions of tiny lights drifted, each one pulsing faintly before disappearing into the distance. It was beautiful and overwhelming, a vast expanse of nothing and everything all at once. Mia stood slowly, her hands clutching the charm at her neck. "Where am I?" she murmured. "This," a voice answered, deep and melodic, "is the realm of lost seconds." Mia spun, her heart racing. Before her stood a figure cloaked in flowing silver, their face obscured by a mask that seemed to shift like mercury. They held a staff that glowed faintly, its top adorned with a single golden gear. The figure's presence was both calming and unnerving, like a clock that ticked just slightly out of sync. "Who are you?" Mia asked, her voice trembling despite her best effort to sound brave. The figure tilted its head slightly. "I am the timekeeper," they said, their voice echoing faintly. "Guardian of this place, keeper of the moments cast aside." Mia frowned. "Cast aside? You mean all of these lights are seconds?" The timekeeper nodded. "Seconds lost to hesitation, stolen by distraction, forgotten in dreams. They gather here, drifting without purpose." Mia's gaze followed the glowing lights. Each one pulsed softly like a heartbeat. She felt a pang of sadness, thinking of all the time she had wasted. "Why am I here?" she asked, pulling her thoughts back to the present. The timekeeper's mask shimmered, as though they were smiling. "You seek a missing piece of the master clock," they said. "One of its gears, lost long ago, has found its way here, but retrieving it is not so simple." The timekeeper gestured with their staff, and one of the glowing lights floated closer, growing brighter as it approached. As it came to rest in the air before Mia, the light dissolved, revealing a small golden gear. It was perfect, intricate, and unmistakably a part of the master clock. Mia reached for it instinctively, but the timekeeper's staff blocked her hand. "Be warned, child," they said. "The cost of meddling with time is never light. To take this piece, you must give something in return." "What do you mean?" Mia asked, her voice tight. "What kind of cost?" The timekeeper tilted their head again. "You carry moments of your own, precious memories, fleeting dreams, wishes whispered to the stars. To restore the master clock, you must surrender one. Choose wisely." Mia froze, her hand hovering near the gear. The thought of giving up a memory was terrifying. Memories were part of who she was. What if she lost something important, something irreplaceable? She clenched her fists, her father's face flashing in her mind. He was counting on her, even if he didn't know it. The world was counting on her. She couldn't let fear stop her now. "Take it," she said finally, her voice steady. The timekeeper lowered their staff, the golden gear hovering closer. "Very well," they said. "What you lose may guide you back, or leave you lost forever." The light surrounding Mia pulsed, enveloping her in warmth. She felt something shift inside her, a faint tug, like a thread being pulled loose. A memory surfaced. A summer day in the meadow, her father laughing as they raced to catch fireflies. She clutched at it desperately, but it slipped through her grasp, dissolving like morning mist. The light dimmed, and the golden gear rested in her hands. Mia gasped, her chest tight. The memory was gone, its edges blurred in her mind. She knew it had existed, but the details were already fading, replaced by an ache she couldn't name. "The gear is yours," the timekeeper said, their voice softer now. "Go and tread carefully. Time's balance is delicate and your journey is far from over." The world rippled again, the starlit ground dissolving beneath her. Mia clutched the gear tightly as the golden light from the master clock's heart surrounded her once more. When she opened her eyes, she was back in the workshop, the faint hum of the broken clock still echoing in the silence. Her hand brushed the gear, its smooth surface warm. The cost of retrieving it lingered in her chest, a hollow space where her memory had been. But she couldn't stop now. The master clock needed her, and the world depended on her success. Taking a deep breath, she turned back to the clock and set to work. Chapter 7: The Rival's Trap. The workshop hummed faintly with life as Mia placed the golden gear into its rightful place within the master clock. The intricate mechanism accepted it seamlessly, the soft click reverberating through the still air. For the first time, Mia felt a glimmer of hope. The master clock was still broken, but she was making progress. Piece by piece, she was undoing Julian's reckless tampering. But as she leaned closer to inspect her work, a low vibration coursed through the room. The air grew heavier, pressing against her chest like an invisible hand. Mia froze. This wasn't the hum of the master clock, it was something else, something darker. A shadow flickered in the corner of her vision and her heart leapt. Julian. She spun around, but the room was empty, save for the faint shimmer of disturbed air. The silence deepened, carrying with it an unnatural stillness that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. Julian knew she was fixing the clock, and he wasn't going to let her succeed. The first sign of his interference came as Mia left the workshop, clutching the blueprint her father had hidden. She needed another part of the clock, another missing gear or spring, and the next clue pointed to the frozen river at the edge of the village. The world outside was eerily still, the same as before, but now it felt charged with tension, as if something unseen was watching her. As she reached the river, her stomach twisted. The water, frozen mid-flow, looked like a glass sculpture, each ripple and wave suspended in unnatural perfection. But something was wrong. The surface gleamed too brightly, its edges jagged and sharp, like broken shards of ice waiting to trap her. Mia hesitated, stepping closer. A faint shimmer ran across the water, and then without warning, the ice shifted. Spikes shot upward, creating a labyrinth of jagged paths that cut through the river like a maze. The air around her grew colder, biting at her skin. "You think you can undo me, Mia?" Julian's voice echoed from nowhere and everywhere, mocking. "This is my world now. You can't outsmart time." Mia gritted her teeth. "Time doesn't belong to you, Julian. It never did." She studied the frozen maze before her, its glittering spikes shifting faintly as if alive. The only way forward was through. Wrapping her cloak tighter around her, Mia stepped carefully onto the ice, her boots slipping on the slick surface. The spikes seemed to react to her presence, growing taller and sharper as she moved. She paused, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Julian's trap wasn't just about the ice. It was about the stillness itself. He was using the frozen world against her, bending it to his will. Mia crouched low, inspecting the ground. Beneath the ice, faint currents shimmered, their movements barely perceptible. They seemed to form a pattern, guiding her toward the safest path. Trusting her instincts, she followed the currents, weaving through the maze as the spikes groaned and shifted around her. It wasn't easy. Several times the ice cracked beneath her feet, forcing her to leap onto more stable ground. Her hands stung from the cold, and her knees ached from crawling across sharp edges. But she pushed on, her father's voice steady in her mind. "Patience, Mia. Every puzzle has a solution." Finally, she reached the far side of the river, where a small golden spring lay embedded in the ice. She pried it free, her fingers trembling from the cold. As soon as the spring was in her hand, the icy maze dissolved, collapsing into a smooth, glass-like surface once more. Julian's voice echoed faintly. "Clever, but you won't make it much further." Mia didn't respond. She had no time for his taunts. Tucking the spring into her satchel, she hurried toward the forest, the next destination marked on her father's blueprint. The forest was darker than she remembered, its tall trees casting long shadows over the frozen ground. Every branch and leaf was suspended in mid-motion, creating a web of tangled limbs that blocked her path. It was as if the entire forest had been frozen mid-breath, each tree caught in a perpetual struggle against the wind. Mia stepped cautiously into the thicket, ducking beneath low-hanging branches. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint creak of the frozen wood. As she moved deeper, the shadows seemed to shift, creating paths that led nowhere and doubling back on themselves. She stopped, frustration bubbling to the surface. Julian had twisted the forest into a labyrinth, designed to trap her in its depths. She closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath. "Think, Mia, what would Papa do?" Her fingers brushed the copper charm at her neck, its faint warmth grounding her. The charm's hum seemed to grow louder in the stillness, pulling her attention upward. She opened her eyes, scanning the trees, the constellations carved into the master clock's blueprint. They were her guide. The trees formed shapes, their frozen branches pointing toward the stars above. The North Star shone faintly in the frozen sky, its light piercing through the shadows. Mia followed its glow, climbing over tangled roots and squeezing through narrow gaps in the trees. The forest grew quieter as she moved, the air becoming lighter, less oppressive. At the centre of the labyrinth, she found another missing piece of the clock, a tiny, delicate cog nestled in the hollow of a tree. She reached for it, half expecting Julian's trap to snap shut, but nothing happened. She tucked the cog into her satchel, her relief short-lived as Julian's voice returned. "You can't stop me, Mia. Fix the clock if you must, but the balance of time is mine to control." Mia's jaw tightened. "We'll see about that." With the cog and spring in hand, she made her way back to the workshop. Julian had underestimated her. She wasn't just repairing the master clock, she was proving that time itself was stronger than his ambition, and she wouldn't stop until the world was set right. Chapter 8. The Heart of the Master Clock. The master clock loomed before Mia, its once perfect face marred by cracks and misaligned gears. The golden components she had recovered glinted in her satchel, their warmth a faint reminder of the cost she'd already paid. The frozen village above lay silent, its people trapped mid-breath. Her father's still, unblinking form haunted her thoughts. This was it, the final piece. She approached the clock, her heart thudding in the unnatural quiet. The scattered gears and springs on the workbench told the story of Julian's destruction, but she was almost there. The blueprint she had carried from the forest rested on the table beside her, its intricate sketches guiding her hands. She placed the golden cog and spring carefully into their respective slots, each clicking into place as though they had been waiting for this moment. As she tightened the last screw, the clock shuddered. The air rippled and the hum that had been missing for so long returned, faint at first but growing stronger. Mia's chest swelled with hope. She had done it. The master clock was coming back to life. Then the hum shifted, deepening into a low, resonant tone that made her bones vibrate. Light spilled from the clock's centre, golden and bright, wrapping around her like a cocoon. The room seemed to dissolve, and Mia found herself standing in an endless expanse of starlight. The timekeeper was there, their silver cloak flowing as though moved by an unseen wind. Their shifting mask glinted in the golden light, and their staff pulsed faintly with power. "You've done well, child," they said, their voice calm yet heavy with meaning. "But the heart of the master clock cannot turn without a final act of balance." Mia swallowed hard. "What do you mean? I fixed it, the gears, the springs, everything is in place." The timekeeper tilted their head as though amused by her innocence. "Time is not mere machinery, Mia. It is bound by the threads of memory, of experience. To restore balance, something must be given in return. That is the law of time." Mia's stomach sank. "What do I have to give?" The timekeeper raised their staff and a faint shimmer appeared in the air between them. It was a memory, her memory. She saw herself as a child, sitting by her father's side in the meadow, fireflies dancing around them as he told her stories of the stars. His laughter echoed faintly, warm and familiar, like a melody she couldn't bear to lose. "To restore time," the timekeeper said, "you must surrender a memory of your choosing. This one calls to the clock. It is tied to your heart and to your purpose. Without it, the clock will remain still. The world will remain frozen." Mia's breath caught. That memory was more than a moment. It was a part of who she was. It was the warmth of her father's love, the foundation of her determination to fix what was broken. To lose it felt unthinkable. Her voice trembled. "And if I refuse?" The timekeeper's mask shimmered and the starlit expanse around them darkened. "If you refuse, time will remain as it is now. You will live in this stillness, untouched by its flow, forever outside its grasp. You alone will move while the world around you remains frozen." Mia's mind raced. She thought of her father, locked in place at his workbench, the villagers frozen mid-motion, their lives stolen by Julian's tampering. She thought of the endless silence, the weight of being the only one left to move in a world that could never change. Her hands curled into fists. She had come too far, sacrificed too much to stop now, but the thought of losing her memory felt like tearing out a piece of her soul. "Is there no other way?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The timekeeper tilted their head. "There is always another way. But every path requires a cost. It is not for me to decide. It is for you." Mia closed her eyes, the ache in her chest growing heavier. She thought of her father, his unwavering belief in her, and the lessons he had taught her. She thought of the fireflies, the laughter, the stars. And she thought of the people who depended on her, the frozen world waiting to be set free. Slowly she opened her eyes. "Take it," she said, her voice firm despite the tremble in her hands. "Take the memory." The timekeeper raised their staff and the shimmering memory floated toward the heart of the master clock. It pulsed once, twice, before vanishing into the golden light. Mia felt the loss immediately, a hollow ache in her chest where the memory had been. She could still remember the outline of it, the fireflies, her father's laughter, but the details were gone, blurred beyond recognition. The master clock shuddered, its gears turning for the first time since Julian's betrayal. The golden light grew brighter, enveloping Mia in warmth. She felt the hum resonate through her body, steady and strong, like the beating of a giant heart. When the light faded, she was back in the workshop. The master clock stood before her, fully restored, its hands moving smoothly across its face. The hum filled the room, vibrant and alive. Mia pressed a hand to her chest, the ache of her loss still raw, but as she looked at the clock, a faint smile tugged at her lips. Time was flowing again. The world could move forward. Her father's voice whispered in her mind, faint but steady. "Patience, Mia. Every puzzle has a solution." She stood tall, her resolve stronger than ever. Julian might still be out there, but the balance of time was hers to protect, and she would ensure it stayed that way, no matter the cost. Chapter 9. Time Restored. The master clock's hum grew louder, filling the workshop with a sound that was both mechanical and alive. The golden light from its gears spilled across the walls, chasing away the shadows of stillness. Mia stood before it, her hands trembling from exhaustion and the lingering ache of her sacrifice. The clock's hands, immobile for so long, now moved smoothly, their rhythm steady and reassuring. As the final click echoed through the room, Mia felt a ripple pass through the air. It started as a faint vibration, then spread outward, growing stronger. The stillness that had gripped the world began to break. She bolted up the stairs, flinging the hidden cabinet open and stepping into the shop. The familiar ticking of clocks filled her ears, a sound she had almost forgotten. Outside, the frozen village began to stir. The baker, who had been trapped mid-pour, gasped as the flour spilled from his hands. The child chasing her hoop blinked in surprise as it clattered to the ground. The air itself seemed to breathe again, warm and alive. Mia's heart leapt with relief, but she didn't stop to watch. She raced to her father's workshop at the back of the house, bursting through the door. Tobias stood where she had last seen him, his magnifying glass still in hand. For a moment she feared he wouldn't wake. Then he blinked, confusion flickering across his face. "Mia," he said, his voice hoarse, What happened?" Mia flung herself into his arms, the tears she had been holding back finally spilling over. "It's over, Papa. I fixed it. The master clock is whole again." Tobias pulled back, his brow furrowed. "You repaired the master clock?" His gaze softened as he saw the exhaustion etched into her face. "You did something remarkable, didn't you?" Before Mia could answer, a crash echoed from the front of the shop. Her stomach twisted. Julian. She helped her father to his feet, and together they hurried toward the noise. They found Julian in the main room, surrounded by shattered glass from a broken display case. His usually smug face was pale, his eyes wild with panic. The hum of the master clock must have drawn him here, but now, with time restored, he seemed small and vulnerable. "Julian," Tobias said, his voice firm but not unkind. "What have you done?" Julian flinched, backing toward the door. I didn't mean for it to go this far," he stammered, his usual arrogance replaced with desperation. I wanted to prove I was better than you, that I deserved to have the clock." "You nearly destroyed everything," Tobias said, stepping closer. His voice carried disappointment, but there was no anger in it. "Time is not a toy to be claimed. It is a responsibility." Julian's hands shook, his back pressed against the doorframe. "I didn't know what I was doing," he admitted, his voice breaking. I didn't want this." Mia stepped forward, her anger simmering beneath her exhaustion. "You didn't want this. You froze the entire world, Julian. You left us all to suffer because of your pride." Julian's eyes darted to her, guilt shadowing his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't think it would—" Tobias raised a hand, silencing him. "Julian, the harm you've caused cannot be undone. But mistakes, even grave ones, are part of learning. If you are willing to change, to truly understand the weight of time, there may still be a place for you." Mia's jaw tightened. "You're going to forgive him? After everything he's done?" Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "Forgiveness is not for him, Mia. It's for us. Holding on to anger will only weigh us down. But Julian must choose the harder path, one of humility and growth." Julian looked between them, his face a mixture of shame and hope. I'll try," he said quietly, "if you'll let me." Tobias nodded. "Then we start anew. But first, you must leave. Go reflect on what you've done, and when you're ready to return, we'll see if you've learned what it means to respect time." Julian hesitated, then turned and slipped out the door, disappearing into the now-moving village. Mia watched him go, her emotions tangled. She wanted to believe he could change, but trust would take time. Her father sighed, his gaze softening as he turned back to her. "You've done something extraordinary, Mia. Something even I couldn't have done." She shook her head, her voice low. "I lost something, Papa. A memory. It was the cost of restoring the clock." Tobias's face grew solemn. "The master clock always demands a balance. But the memories you hold in your heart, the ones tied to the people you love, can never truly fade. They live in who you are." Mia let his words settle, the ache in her chest still raw but somehow lighter. The master clock had been restored, and time was flowing again. The world had been saved. But as she glanced toward the clock's hidden door, she knew her journey wasn't truly over. Time had its own mysteries, and she was now its keeper. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them. For now, though, she allowed herself to rest, leaning into her father's embrace as the ticking of clocks filled the shop, a sound she would never again take for granted. Chapter 10: The Keeper of Time. The village ticked with life once more. The baker called to passers-by from his stall, laughter echoed from children playing in the square, and the river near the edge of town rippled freely under the afternoon sun. Yet for Mia, the world felt different. She stood in the doorway of her father's workshop, looking out at the bustling street. But her thoughts were far away. The master clock was whole again, humming softly in the secret room below. Its golden gears turned smoothly, each tick a promise that time would flow as it should. Mia felt its rhythm in her bones now, a connection she hadn't fully understood before. Time was no longer just a concept or a background hum of life. It was alive, fragile, and bound to her in ways she could scarcely explain. Her father joined her in the doorway, his hands resting on the wooden frame. Tobias looked older now, the lines on his face deeper, but his eyes were warm with pride. "You've grown into something remarkable, Mia," he said. "Not just a repairer of clocks, but a guardian of what truly matters." She glanced up at him, her expression thoughtful. "I didn't want this at first," she admitted. "The responsibility, the sacrifice, it felt too big, too much for me." Her gaze returned to the village. "But now I see why you kept it secret, why you protected it." Tobias smiled softly. "Time is a gift, Mia, but also a burden. It demands balance, and that balance must be guarded by someone who understands its weight." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "I've carried it long enough. It's time for me to step aside." Mia's stomach tightened at the thought. Her father had always been the keeper of time, the steady hand guiding the master clock's flow. The idea of him stepping away left her feeling untethered, as though she were too small for the role. "But what if I fail?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "What if I can't protect it like you did?" Tobias turned her to face him, his gaze steady. "You've already proven yourself, Mia. You faced what I could not. You restored what I feared was lost forever. Time chose you as its keeper the moment you stepped into that workshop and made the choice to fix what was broken." Mia nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling over her. She thought of the journey she had taken, the traps, the sacrifices, the impossible decisions. Each step had shaped her into someone stronger, someone ready, And while the ache of what she had lost still lingered, she knew it was part of her now, a reminder of what was at stake. The following morning, Mia stood in the secret workshop, her hands brushing over the smooth surface of the master clock. The room felt different now. The hum of the clock was no longer a distant sound. It was part of her, woven into her heartbeat. Her father stood beside her, his hands clasped in front of him. "This workshop is yours now," he said, "and the master clock will look to you for guidance. You'll feel its pull, its needs. It will speak to you in ways words cannot." Mia glanced at him. "What will you do?" Tobias chuckled. "Rest for a change, perhaps even travel. There's a world out there I've barely seen, and I think it's time I explored it." His words brought a faint smile to her lips. The idea of her father stepping into the world, free from the burden he had carried for so long, felt right. He had earned this. As he moved toward the staircase, he paused, looking back at her. "Remember, Mia, the master clock isn't just gears and springs. It's alive in its own way, tied to the world and the people who live in it. Guard it not just with your hands, but with your heart." She nodded, her chest tight. "I'll make you proud, Papa." "You already have." He left then, his footsteps fading up the staircase. The workshop was quiet, save for the steady hum of the clock. Mia stood there for a long moment, her fingers brushing over the copper charm at her neck. It felt warm, like the memory of her father's hand on her shoulder. Stepping closer to the master clock, she placed her hands on its smooth face. "I promise to protect you," she said softly, her voice steady. "I'll guard the balance, no matter the cost. Curiosity, jealousy, ambition, they won't touch you again. I won't let them." The clock's hum seemed to deepen, resonating through the room like a quiet acknowledgement. As the day stretched on, Mia sat at the workbench, her tools laid out before her. The weight of her new role was heavy, but it no longer scared her. She was the keeper of time now, and she would honour the responsibility with all that she was. Above her, the clocks in the shop ticked on, their rhythm steady and true. And in the secret room below, the master clock turned, its golden gears spinning with a quiet promise. Time would flow, and Mia would ensure it always would.